Everyone in the city believed Marcus Hale was a self-made success. He dressed the part, tailored suits, polished shoes, a watch that caught light just long enough for people to notice. He spoke with certainty, the kind that made junior executives nod before he finished his sentences. In public, he was introduced as a real estate investor, a man who knew the market, someone whose opinions carried weight at dinner tables and boardrooms alike. And beside him, almost always half a step behind, was his wife. Elena Hale never looked like money. She wore simple dresses, neutral colors, no logos, no diamonds large enough to invite questions. At events, she smiled politely, spoke only when spoken to, and declined interviews without explanation. People assumed she was shy, or submissive, or grateful. Marcus let them assume. In fact, he encouraged it. To him, Elena was background, an accessory from an earlier chapter of his life. They had married young, before he believed he was destined for more, back when he still thought struggle was romantic and loyalty was enough. Now, years later, he had outgrown that version of himself, and in his mind, he had outgrown her too. What Marcus never realized, what no one realized, was that Elena's quiet presence wasn't humility. It was concealment. Their home sat on a private hill overlooking the city. Glass walls, imported stone, minimalist design. Marcus referred to it as his house. He had chosen the architect, signed the visible documents, hosted parties where he poured expensive wine, and spoke loudly about deals he hadn't yet closed. Elena never corrected him. She moved through the house like a guest who knew she wouldn't stay long. What Marcus didn't know was that the house, like nearly everything else in his life, was not his at all. It was held under a trust, and the trust answered to Elena. But that truth lived far beneath the surface, buried under layers of shell companies, offshore holdings, and legal structures so clean and silent that even Marcus's personal accountant had no idea where the money truly came from. Elena had been raised differently. Her father never allowed his name to appear on buildings. Her mother taught her that wealth was safest when invisible. By the time Elena was 25, she already controlled assets worth more than most CEOs would see in a lifetime. Commercial towers, residential developments, land banks spanning multiple countries. She had learned early. Power worked best when underestimated. So when she married Marcus, she never corrected his assumptions. When he asked vague questions about investments early on, she answered vaguely. When he bragged about being a provider, she smiled and thanked him. Marcus mistook her silence for dependence. That mistake would become the most expensive one of his life. By the time the story truly began, Marcus was bored. Bored of the house. Bored of the marriage. Bored of a woman who didn't compete for attention or challenge his ego. Elena had grown even quieter over the years, retreating into her routines. Early mornings, long walks, private calls she took from a closed office door. Marcus never wondered why. Instead, he noticed Clara. Clara worked at a boutique firm downtown, ambitious, sharp, impressed by titles. She laughed at Marcus's stories, touched his arm when he spoke, looked at him as if he were already something greater than he was. With Clara, he felt powerful again, important, desired. Within months, the affair was no longer discreet. Marcus stopped hiding late nights. He criticized Elena openly, her clothes, her calm, her refusal to grow with him. He framed it as honesty, as evolution. Elena listened without interruption. She had heard worse in boardrooms. What she had not expected, what even she didn't anticipate, was how far Marcus would go once he convinced himself she was weak. One evening, after another argument Marcus didn't bother finishing, he stood in the center of the living room and announced it casually, like a decision already approved. "I'm selling the house." Elena looked up from her book. "Selling?" "Yes," he said, irritated by the question. "Clara needs a place." something suitable. There was no apology in his voice, no hesitation, just entitlement. Elena studied him for a long moment. She didn't ask how. She didn't remind him of anything. She didn't raise her voice. She only said, "Do what you think is best." Marcus took that as permission, as surrender. Within weeks, paperwork moved quickly, faster than it should have. Marcus used contact he trusted, lawyers who never asked the wrong questions, brokers who saw commission and looked no further. He transferred the house to Clara under the belief that it was his asset to give. He never noticed the anomaly in the documents, never questioned why approvals came so easily, never realized the system was letting him hang himself. Elena watched everything from a distance. She attended meetings remotely. She signed nothing personally. She placed one quiet phone call to her legal director and gave one instruction only: let proceed. By the time Clara stepped into the house, believing she had won, Elena had already prepared the ground beneath all of them. Marcus thought the story was ending. In truth, it was only beginning. And the billionaire Elena Hale, still unseen, still underestimated, was about to step out of the shadows. Clara arrived at the Hilltop estate like a queen returning to a conquered kingdom. She didn't walk in. She entered, chin lifted, eyes scanning the glass walls and marble floors, as if she were taking inventory of everything she believed she deserved. Her heels clicked sharply against a stone, a sound meant to announce authority. She carried herself like a woman who thought winning a man automatically meant winning his world. Marcus watched her with pride. This was what he wanted: visible admiration, obvious desire, someone who made him feel like the center of the story again. He wrapped an arm around Clara's waist and guided her through the living room as if he were unveiling a masterpiece. "See," he said, voice low with satisfaction. "I told you, this is the kind of life you're meant for." Clara smiled and ran her fingers along the edge of the kitchen island, her nails tapping softly against imported stone. "It's perfect," she murmured. Then she turned to him, eyes glittering. "And it's really mine?" Marcus laughed like the question was silly. "Of course. I signed the papers myself." He believed that, too. Elena was not there to witness Clara's victory lap. She had removed her personal items weeks earlier, quietly, neatly. No dramatic packing. No crying. No scenes. Just the silent disappearance of a woman who seemed to accept replacement with the same calm. She accepted rain. Marcus thought her absence was weakness. He mistook grace for defeat. He didn't know she had already moved into a private penthouse downtown, one that wasn't rented, but owned outright through an investment holding company that didn't publicly connect to her name. He didn't know she had already arranged security, legal counsel, and a team of executives who answered only to her. To Marcus, she was just his wife, fading into the past. So he celebrated. Within days, Marcus threw a party at the house. Clara's party, he insisted. He invited the same circle that always fed his ego: business acquaintances, junior investors, a few mid-tier executives who liked pretending they ran with the elite. The champagne flowed, music echoed against the glass walls, and Clara stood in a designer dress that glittered under chandelier lights. Marcus introduced her without shame. "This is Clara," he announced. "The woman I should have been with all along." Some guests laughed awkwardly. Some applauded because the room demanded it. No one asked where Elena was, not out loud, but the absence lingered in the corners. Clara basked in the attention. She moved from group to group, repeating the story of her new beginning like a script. Each time, the story grew grander. Marcus was divorcing Elena because Elena was nothing. Elena never contributed. Elena held him back. Clara said it with the confidence of someone who hadn't yet learned how dangerous quiet women could be. Marcus drank, smiled, and let the myth expand. At the edge of the party, an older man stood near the bar. Victor Lang, a seasoned investor Marcus had always wanted to impress. Victor had the calm demeanor of old money, the kind that didn't speak loudly because it never needed to. Victor watched Clara's performance with mild curiosity. Then he turned to Marcus. "Interesting choice." Marcus grinned. misunderstanding the tone. Right? She understands my world. Elena never did. Victor's eyes held a strange flicker. You'd be surprised, he said softly. Marcus waved it off. Elena was quiet. No ambition. No taste. She was just there. Victor said nothing after that. He only lifted his glass, took a sip, and looked away like he had just witnessed someone step onto a trapdoor without realizing it. 2 days after the party, reality began to crack. It started with a phone call. Marcus was in his downtown office, leaning back in his chair, scrolling through photos from the party on his phone. Clara smiling, Clara posing by the pool, Clara holding champagne against the city skyline. His assistant knocked and entered with a tense expression. "Mr. Hale, the bank is on the line." Marcus frowned. "Which bank?" "The one that handles your accounts." They said it's urgent. Marcus took the call, irritation sharpening his voice. "Yes." A calm, professional tone answered. "Mr. Hale, we're calling regarding a change in your account status. Your credit facilities have been frozen temporarily pending verification." Marcus sat upright. "Frozen? That's impossible. I have obligations." "We understand, sir. But there appears to be an ownership discrepancy connected to several assets listed under your financial profile." Marcus laughed once, short and mocking. "There's no discrepancy. I own my assets." There was a pause on the line. Then the banker said carefully, "Sir, according to our records, you're not the beneficial owner of the primary property used as collateral." Marcus's throat tightened. "What are you talking about? That house is mine. Our compliance division is reviewing documents that suggest otherwise. We've been instructed to request updated proof of ownership and authorization." Marcus slammed the phone down and immediately called his lawyer. The same man who had pushed the house transfer through quickly, the same man who had assured him everything was clean. The lawyer didn't answer. Marcus called again, straight to voicemail. The next call went to his broker. No answer. By late afternoon, Marcus drove up to the Hilltop estate, anger burning hot in his chest. He expected to walk in and see Clara, to vent, to be comforted by the illusion of control. But when he arrived, the gate didn't open. He punched in the access code. Denied. He tried again. Denied. He rolled down his window and yelled at the intercom like that would intimidate a machine. "Open the gate. It's my house." A calm voice answered. Not the usual security company. A different one. "Mr. Hale." The voice said, polite but firm, "You're not authorized to enter this property." Marcus went cold. "Who the hell is this?" "This property is under new security management." The voice replied, "If you have questions, you should contact the property's legal owner." Marcus's hands trembled on the steering wheel. "I am the owner." Another pause. Then, like a blade sliding gently between ribs, the voice said, "According to our records, you are not." Marcus sat frozen in the car, staring at the estate he had lived in. The estate he had sold like a trophy, now sealed against him like a fortress, rejecting an imposter. His phone buzzed again. A message this time, from an unfamiliar number. "Unknown. You should read the documents you signed. Some signatures matter, and some are just illusions." Marcus's heart hammered. For the first time, a thought, small, terrifying, cut through his ego. Elena knew, not only knew, she let it happen. And somewhere behind the calm silence he had mocked for years, a billionaire-level strategy was unfolding. One Marcus couldn't even see yet, because Elena hadn't screamed. She hadn't begged. She hadn't fought in front of witnesses. She had simply stepped back and prepared to remove everything he thought was his. And Clara, still inside the house, still believing she had won, had no idea the ground was already disappearing beneath her feet. Elena Hale had always understood one truth better than most people ever would. Real power doesn't announce itself. It observes. While Marcus was panicking, calling lawyers, yelling at banks, pounding on gates that no longer recognized him, Elena sat in a quiet conference room 40 floors above the city, listening. The room was minimal. No artwork. No visible branding. Just a long table, soft lighting, and 6 people seated across from her, each one representing a piece of an empire Marcus never knew existed. They didn't call her Mrs. Hale here. They called her chairwoman. At the head of the table, Elena rested her hands calmly on a leather portfolio. Her expression was neutral, composed, unreadable. No anger, no satisfaction, just precision. Status, she said. A man in his early 50s, silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat. He was the chief legal architect of her holdings, a man who had structured acquisitions across 3 continents without ever appearing on a magazine cover. The property transfer was executed exactly as anticipated, he said. Mr. Hale believed he was acting independently. In reality, he triggered a conditional clause embedded in the trust. Elena nodded once. The trust, that was the part Marcus never saw. Years earlier, long before the affair, before the arrogance hardened into cruelty, Elena had placed their shared residence into a protective asset trust registered under a holding entity that traced back to her family office. Marcus's name appeared on documents, yes, but only as an occupant, a manager, never as the beneficial owner. He had been holding a key to a vault he never owned. When he transferred the property, the lawyer continued, he unknowingly violated the trust's alienation restrictions that activated automatic reversion and asset freeze protocols. Another woman at the table, Elena's private wealth director, slid a folder forward. Additionally, the banks financing his business ventures have begun compliance reviews. Several lines of credit are tied directly to assets he assumed were his. Elena opened the folder and scanned the figures. Not because she needed to, she already knew the numbers, but because she respected process. How long? She asked. 48 hours before full suspension, the woman replied. 72 before public exposure. Elena closed the folder gently. She remembered Marcus laughing once, years ago, when she told him she preferred redundancy over risk. You think like someone afraid to lose, he had said. No, she thought like someone who refused to be taken. While Marcus spiraled, Elena moved forward. She instructed the team to initiate Phase 2. That meant no dramatic announcements, no confrontations, no warnings, just withdrawals. The first call went to a private equity firm that Marcus had boasted about partnering with. By morning, the firm had received notice that their capital backer was no longer participating. The second went to a development project Marcus had attached his reputation to. Permits stalled. Funding paused. Partners suddenly went silent. The third was personal. Elena contacted Clara, not directly, through an attorney. Clara was still waking up in the Hilltop estate, still sipping coffee by the glass wall, still imagining a future where she had replaced Elena permanently. She wore silk robes and walked barefoot across floors she believed were hers, until a man in a dark suit appeared at the door. She opened it with a smile that vanished instantly. "Miss Clark?" he asked. "Yes." "I'm here on behalf of the property's legal owner." Clara frowned. "That's me." The man handed her an envelope. "According to court records, you are not the owner," he said calmly. "You are an unauthorized occupant. You have 48 hours to vacate." Clara laughed, a sharp, nervous sound. "This is a joke. Marcus." "Mr. Hale," the man interrupted, "does not own this property." The words didn't land immediately. They hovered. Then they cut. Clara's hand shook as she opened the envelope. Legal language. Official seals. No ambiguity. Her phone was already in her hand. Marcus didn't answer. He couldn't. At that same moment, Marcus was sitting in a law office that suddenly felt hostile. His lawyer, finally present, looked smaller than usual, less confident. "You told me it was clean," Marcus snapped. "You told me the house was mine." The lawyer swallowed. The documentation was complex. The ownership structure was layered. "I assumed." "You assumed?" Marcus roared. "I'm ruined because you assumed?" The lawyer leaned back, defeated. "Marcus, you were never the owner. You were authorized to live there. That's all." Marcus felt something inside him crack. All those years, all that certainty, all those moments he spoke down to Elena, believing she depended on him, it had all been backwards. By the end of the week, whispers had begun. Banks stopped returning calls. Invitations disappeared. Meetings were postponed indefinitely. Marcus's name, once spoken with mild respect, was now attached to a question mark. What happened to Hale? Why are his accounts frozen? Who really owns his assets? And then came the moment Marcus feared most. The realization. He sat alone in his apartment. Temporary, borrowed, stripped of luxury, and replayed every conversation he had ever dismissed. Every time Elena stayed silent. Every time she let him believe he was in control. She hadn't been weak. She had been waiting. Elena, meanwhile, stood in her penthouse office, watching the city lights glow beneath her. She held no champagne, made no speeches, felt no need to celebrate. She had not destroyed Marcus. She had simply stepped out of his shadow, and now the shadow was swallowing him. But the final act had not yet arrived, because the billionaire doesn't strike once. She makes sure the lesson is unforgettable. Marcus Hale learned the truth the way powerful men usually do, in public and without mercy. It began quietly, almost politely. An email from the regulatory board, a notice from a financial journal requesting comment, a calendar invitation canceled without explanation. By the time Marcus realized this wasn't coincidence, the narrative had already escaped his control. He sat in a downtown cafe, scrolling through his phone when he saw it. A headline, "Ownership Dispute Raises Questions Around Hale Capital's Asset Claims." His breath caught. The article didn't accuse him outright. It didn't need to. It simply laid out facts, corporate filings, trust structures, discrepancies between declared assets and verified ownership. The tone was clinical, detached, deadly. By noon, the story had been republished. By evening, commentators were speculating. By nightfall, Marcus's phone was silent. Not because people were busy, but because they were distancing themselves. He wasn't being attacked. He was being erased. Across the city, Elena watched the same headlines appear on a screen in her private office. She didn't flinch. This phase had been inevitable. Public truth always lagged behind private power. Her legal counsel stood nearby. "We can proceed with disclosure tomorrow. Full documentation." Elena considered it. "No," she said softly. "Let them discover it layer by layer." The next morning, Marcus was served papers. Not divorce papers. Summons. The courtroom was modern, glass-lined, unforgiving. Marcus entered expecting noise, spectacle, something he could argue against. Instead, he walked into silence. Journalists sat with pens poised. Observers whispered. A few familiar faces avoided his eyes. Clara wasn't there. She had stopped returning his calls 2 days earlier, her own panic eclipsing any loyalty she once pretended to feel. Marcus took his seat, heart pounding. Then Elena entered. She didn't look like his wife. She looked like authority. Tailored suit, minimal jewelry, calm posture. The kind of presence that didn't demand attention, but commanded it anyway. People straightened instinctively. Even the judge acknowledged her with a nod that carried respect. Marcus stared. This was not the woman he dismissed. This was not the woman he replaced. This was someone else entirely. The proceedings began. Elena's legal team spoke with precision. They didn't insult Marcus. They didn't dramatize the betrayal. They laid out facts, trust formations, asset histories, ownership trails that stretched back decades. The judge listened. The courtroom listened. Marcus felt the floor drop out beneath him as one truth became unavoidable. He had never been the provider. Every major asset, every credit line, every shared investment, all traced back to Elena. When the judge asked Marcus to respond, his lawyer stood slowly, carefully. "Your Honor," he said, "my client acted under belief that he held authority over the property in question." The judge looked at him evenly. Belief does not constitute ownership. Marcus's mouth opened. No words came. By the time the gavel fell, the ruling was clear. The house transfer was void. Clara's occupancy was illegal. Marcus's financial claims were misrepresented, if not maliciously, then recklessly. The courtroom erupted, not in sound, but in movement. Phones lifted. Journalists typed. The story now had a name. The Billionaire Wife. Outside the courthouse, microphones waited. Elena stepped forward alone. She answered one question. "Mrs. Hale, did you plan this?" Elena met the reporter's eyes calmly. "I planned to protect what was mine." Then she walked away. Marcus didn't follow. He couldn't. By evening, his name had become a cautionary tale. A man who confused proximity to wealth with ownership. A husband who underestimated silence. A figure once respected, now quietly avoided. He returned to his empty apartment and sat in the dark. For the first time, there was nothing left to blame. No Elena to belittle. No Clara to impress. No illusion to hide behind. Only the truth. And the truth was simple. He hadn't lost his empire. He had never had one. Marcus Hale disappeared before anyone officially noticed. Not in a dramatic sense. No headlines, no scandalous photos. But in a quiet way, people vanish when the doors that once opened for them suddenly close. Invitations stopped arriving. Calls went unanswered. His name was no longer useful. He had become invisible. For months after the court ruling, Marcus tried to rebuild. He reached out to former partners, pitched ideas, spoke with the same confidence that once worked in rooms full of ambition and greed. But confidence without capital sounded hollow. People listened politely, then declined. They didn't insult him. They didn't argue. They simply said, "We'll get back to you." They never did. Clara vanished faster. After being forced to vacate the Hilltop estate, she attempted to tell her own version of the story. How she had been misled, how Marcus had promised her everything. But no one cared. She wasn't a victim in a billionaire narrative. She was a footnote. She moved apartments twice in 6 months. Changed jobs. Changed numbers. Each time she tried to reinvent herself, the story followed her like a stain she couldn't wash out. Elena, meanwhile, expanded. The exposure had done something unexpected. It validated what only insiders once knew. Investors who valued discretion now saw her as a fortress. Family offices requested meetings. Governments asked for development proposals. Elena accepted selectively. She restructured her portfolio, consolidating assets under a new global entity. Quiet, efficient, untouchable. Her name appeared only where it had to, and even then, sparingly. When asked why she never spoke publicly about Marcus, her answer was simple. He made his choices. And that was all. The Hilltop estate was sold. Not to punish, not to reclaim memories, but to finalize the separation. The proceeds went where they had always belonged, back into the trust. Elena never returned there. She didn't need symbols. Her true exit came months later at a private airport. A small group waited on the tarmac. Executives, legal advisors, one family member. No press, no spectacle, just efficiency. As Elena boarded her jet, she paused briefly and looked back at the city skyline. Somewhere down there, Marcus was still convincing himself that if things had gone differently, if Elena had been honest, if fate had been kinder. But billionaires didn't build empires on if. They built them on preparation. The jet lifted into the sky, carrying Elena toward a future she had never stopped controlling. She didn't win. She simply owned the ending. And Marcus Hale became what powerful men fear most. A lesson. If you enjoy stories where quiet intelligence defeats loud ego, where real wealth moves in silence, and where karma arrives dressed as consequence, subscribe now. New billionaire-level stories every week. Hidden empires, shocking betrayals, power reversals, calm victories without noise. Because true power doesn't shout, it waits. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next story.